And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection, my host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. What the 2024 BC election results ultimately show is that there are two British Columbians. The NDP tends to dominate on the coast with clear majority of the seats in the Lower Mainland and Vancouver Island, and the Conservatives dominate the BC interior of the province with a fair sprinkling of suburban seats in the Lower Mainland. We begin today's Open Connection with former MLA Stikine, Nathan Cullen.
It's a set of mixed feelings for sure, like a lot of disappointment and some surprise. We ran here in Stikine, like one of the best campaigns I've ever seen in all of the 7 elections that I've been in. This one was really good, like a lot of volunteers, good feeling on the doorstep, but there was obviously a real mood for change and, worries about things, some of which the government controls, a bunch of which we don't. But the voters have spoken, so it's a new phase for me.
And looking back at this, you said it was a really, the voter turnout was surprising, I guess, for everyone. Were you kind of surprised by some of the feedback you were getting doing the door-to-doors and stuff?
Well, we were the only campaign out on the doors, which we were out every night. We knocked every door in Smithers 3 times, twice in Telkwa, every village, every door got visited. Like, we've never had that kind of canvas before. We thought we did well in the debate. We thought David Eby did well in the debate. I think there's a couple things. One is there's a lot of folks that are not paying that level of attention. They're sort of hearing that this is a change election and then changing. There was a palpable pent-up frustration over some things. And I also think, to be fair, there was a lot of anger, right? And we saw that early on. Our signs were just getting destroyed like never before. We had that horrible episode with a sign on the highway where someone put up a hanging noose of me. And I talked to a lot of folks in the last couple of days, particularly in First Nations communities, that felt almost intimidated to vote. And that worries me a little bit. Like online, oh my gosh, like the rhetoric was violent sometimes. Not just like, we don't like your government, or Nathan, we don't like you. It was the next level. And I think we should really pay attention to that. And all parties should push away from that, because a couple of things. One is, who's going to run for office? Second, what kind of government are you going to get? If it's if it's that kind of rage or the meanness, like I don't mind debate. I don't mind people disagreeing, even really strongly. I think that's healthy. It's when it crosses over into that other place. I think it's worthwhile, all of us, whatever your political persuasion, of pushing back and calming things down and not making everything so personal. And with that, I don't know how to describe it fairly, Robert, but boy, like just this shocking anger and meanness to it that I don't think serves anybody, frankly, and I don't think that reflects well of who we are as communities. But maybe I'm a bit naive sometimes.
Something like that happens, it doesn't really address some things that really need to be addressed, like healthcare and proper places for housing, things like that, because that's really, no matter what's said and done at the end of the day, we still have these things that need to be done.
And that would be a criticism I might offer, and I hope the Conservatives pivot on this. Like, it felt quite often that people would rather use the problem than try to solve the problem. And ultimately, we have some challenges, and it comes to healthcare and affordability and housing. And it's okay to say, I don't like the way the government's going on this, but it's the next part. And this is what we're going to do about it, and this is how we think it's going to be better. Solving homelessness, getting rid of encampments. Yeah, absolutely. And we need to do more. And so I think in the next little bit, it'll be really interesting. I mean, we don't yet know the way the government is structured right now. It looks likely that the NDP will continue, maybe with support of Greens. That we'll know by weekend or maybe 2 weeks from now. But those problems are still there. And so I think ideas can come from everywhere, every end of the political spectrum. That's not the problem. But you have to start with an intent that says, I'm not just pointing out the problem, I'm here to help solve it and work together. And that's going to be an important challenge for the person replacing me, Sharon. We're going to need to hear a really consistent and loud voice coming from Stikeen, and the ability to pull people together, even people who didn't vote for her. That is always a challenge in politics, and it certainly will be a challenge when it felt quite so divisive in this election for anybody who got elected on either side of the aisle.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. The work of a member of the Legislative Assembly is demanding and complex. As an elected representative, members handle a range of issues and make decisions and bring attention to issues that benefit the province as a whole and their constituent. Let us return the conversation as Nathan shares about his former job duties.
Yeah, and the portfolio I had was something small called water, land, and resource stewardship. So I loved it, and a really great challenge, because how do we promote and have a healthy mining sector, which we do, and take care of the planet, and complete or do way better on our obligations with regards to reconciliation? Like, you're trying to hit that triple word score for those Scrabble enthusiasts, right? Like, you're trying to land on policies that satisfy these really, really basic desires: good paying jobs, a clean world, land and water, and reconfigure government so that it's in line with the Declaration Act and all of the court cases. So that's kind of a good example where a slogan doesn't meet reality. At one point, Mr. Rustad said, well, I'm just going to rip up the Declaration Act. And I thought, and I said, this is, even if you thought that was a good idea for the economy, that's a terrible idea, because you're just going to end up in court. You're going to end up in conflict with protests. Like, a negotiating table is always better in my mind to a courtroom for settling these things. So I think sometimes, politicians will do this, where they'll make an appeal that sounds good, sounds quick, soundbitey, but if you were to actually do it, would be terrible even for the people who support what you're saying, because you got to think ahead. And so, yeah, it was, I loved wrestling with those decisions. And really, I think where our government needs to do better work is on bringing the community along when we're doing land use planning, when we're making agreements with First Nations. How do you bring those that are not sitting at the table along? How do you let them inform the table in a better way? I think those are all really good things that I learned some hard and important lessons about.
And here in the North, we do have some tourism monies coming in, some for skiing, some for fishing, but really, I guess you could say the bulk of the money from the North is coming from resources, natural resources that we have. Do you think that we're doing a pretty good job, or we've done a pretty good job of managing those resources? And what's the hope for the new government coming in?
I'd say that the answer to your question is yes and no. I would say on mining, we've gotten a lot better. That mines from 50 years ago, we just wouldn't permit today, because they end up leaving a massive toxic mess behind that the public end up paying for while the shareholders skip off with profits. So we're building way better mines, and we're doing it with First Nations communities and leadership, and that's making them better too. Forestry has gone through a massive upheaval, and we don't have to tell people in Prince Rupert and Terrace and Hazelton and down the line where since 2000, I think we've lost something like 45,000 forest worker jobs. And that's with different governments. And so the system that had been created in the 70s and 80s for forestry certainly wasn't serving our communities anymore. Whether it was really large multinational companies or the way that the government was issuing forest licenses. And so one of the promises that the NDP made in this campaign didn't get enough attention was to double community forests across BC. And for those, who are familiar with our community forests, they're amazing, right? Very sustainable forestry, lots of money back to the local community, create way more jobs for all the wood that's cut as compared to the, more traditional model. And so I like the ideas of more local control, more local input in terms of how our resources are handled. And so I think that there are some bright lights on the horizon, but this is a major upheaval. So it's a long answer to your short question, but how we handled our resource sector, well, to me, it has to be sustainable and it has to create good jobs and it has to fit with reconciliation. And I think on some of those things, some people want to go back to a model in the 50s and 60s. It's just not an option. And it would be a bad option if you took it, because look at what's happened to our forestry communities. They've been getting hammered, even though the government's pouring money in to help companies diversify and do different things. We need to shake up the model. And I think that's on the table and should be.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. Ask 100 different people to define success, and you'll most likely get 100 different answers. That said, most agree the road to achievement is paved with a lot of hard work and perseverance. Luckily, we have insight and wisdom of those who have already traveled the path to make things a little easier for us along the way. Let us return the conversation with Nathan.
Yeah, a couple of things I would say, and I don't know if it's wisdom, but I think it's true, is that relationships really matter. And I think Sharon, who's coming in, would herself admit that she doesn't have deep or long relationships with many of the First Nations communities, certainly up north or even in the other parts of the riding. And that's really important, because if you don't know each other, it's very difficult to make agreements and to make progress. I would say on the industry side, in some ways, the industry is ahead of where government is, and certainly where the Conservatives' rhetoric was. That I don't hear from any major industry that's saying we should rip up the Declaration Act, or that we don't need First Nations input and consent on mining projects. The reality of the legal environment and the financial environment, the markets, is that when we have an agreement with Tahltan, it is very, very helpful to Newmont to be able to raise money and make a mine happen and create jobs. In the absence of those agreements, you can't raise money. And I don't think that's going to change. So why stand on ideology and rhetoric when the market and the business community is saying, this is where we are right now and this is where it's headed? So that would be my advice, is to put down those sticks about it's us versus them and, First Nations versus non-First Nations. That's just not true. When one group does well, we should all do well. And when it comes to things like mining and other heavy industries, First Nations having a major say in what goes on, building capacity and all of those things, that's just true. So let's just deal with reality now. The election's over. Now it's time to get down to work.
With this new election, we have people who are coming in who they're freshman MLAs, so it's up to those, I guess, those old timers, kind of lack of a better word, to help, cultivate and help those coming in, saying, hey, this is what's going on. You may need to keep an eye on that, or make sure you listen to your constituents, keep your doors open. Any words of wisdom along those lines?
Well, when the campaign's over, it's over. You work for everybody. And so it might not make, there's a speaker coming, I think this weekend or next weekend, talking about climate and climate change. I would encourage the conservative newly elected MLA to go, even though that's not maybe in their mandate. That you got to start reaching out to that. This is what I learned. You got to start reaching out to communities, especially those that didn't vote for you. Second, this was a wave, right? This was a blue wave that came through rural BC, particularly. Whenever there's a wave, you're going to get a mix of representation. I know this because this happened for the NDP federally. We had a big orange wave, and one of the conservative politicians said to me, "Oh, you're going to lose about half of them." And I was like, "No way." And he said, "No, like, waves put forward folks that are not going to like the job at all." You know, they were kind of putting their hand up. They didn't expect to win, then they win, and now they're elected. So I don't say that with any malice at all. It's more, that's what happens, is that what you want in your elected people is folks that struggled and fought and got their way there. Waves happen in this country and they produce a mixed result, and that's the nature of it. When the public says this is the way we're going, they don't read the label. They're just going, and so there'll be a mix, and there'll be people screwing up and saying dumb things. That's going to happen, and yeah, it'll be a tumultuous time over the next little while. But I hope the government settles. I hope we're not sitting facing an election, a week or a month from now. I don't think the public want that. I think they want the problems dealt with and the government to get down to work on healthcare and housing and all those things. So I hope that there's some stability coming out of this, even though the results were so close. I think that's a good expectation for people.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
In a diverse society, organizations and institutions need to be able to understand and meet the needs of different groups. A diverse workforce or community is better equipped to do so, ensuring that products, services, and policies are more relevant and accessible to all. In this final segment of Open Connection, Nathan reflects on the diversity of the newly elected MLAs.
Well, first of all, the last NDP caucus, our government caucus, I was so proud, was 60%, 58% women, and very diverse people from all different backgrounds. And I think that's good because it just reflects who we are as people. A bunch of old white guys sitting around, you look at those photos from the 1960s and 70s, and it's like, oh my gosh, like only old white men voted or something, because look at this. So the diversity, I think, is good because you get better decisions. And that's been proven in study after study in the business world and in politics. The more diverse your room, the higher quality decisions you get, as opposed to everybody being from the same category, right? Rich old white dudes will give you good decisions for rich old white dudes, but nobody else. I think you're casting forward to federal. I think the great unknown is what Mr. Trudeau is going to do. If Trudeau goes into the election as it is right now, it's pretty well predicted it'll be a very bad result for him and his party. I think there's a decent chance he steps down. And I think that will just upset the entire equation. So what's going to happen in terms of federal politics is kind of hinging on one person's decision. Mr. Poilievre is not very well loved personally, like his polling is not great, but the polling against Mr. Trudeau is terrible. So it's one of those by comparison. I think for the benefit of the country, actually, never mind the Liberal Party, I'm sure Mr. Trudeau is, he's hearing it from his caucus, but he's hearing it from a lot of people. And I'd be a little surprised if he tries to maintain himself all the way to the election, because it looks like it's just a foregone conclusion. His time seems to be done. And you know how it is in sports, right? When the team stops listening to the coach, he might be a fine coach, but he's probably an ex-coach pretty soon, and one way or the other. So I think that's the great unknown. It's very hard to predict the Fed, just because if it's all the way it is right now, probably relatively easy to understand. But I think that's a variable that will be answered quite well. Who knows? I would have thought he stepped down already, but we'll see what happens next.
And looking back, it's, I think, what was it, 2 decades, basically, you could say that you've given to the people here in the North. What's next on the agenda for Mr. Cullen now?
Oh, I had a consultant's business before I got into politics, and then when I stepped out of federal, I went back to it and enjoyed it, and then got a call from the then Premier Horgan, and somehow ended up back. That's not happening again. So I'm gonna hang up my shingle and talk to folks, and there's calls coming in. I like small business. I like entrepreneurism. I like going out and hustling and engaging with people. So that's probably, but I'm gonna take a minute. I think it's okay. You're right. It's been 20 years of a very unexpected journey and privilege, Robert. Like, if you had told me when I was in high school that I was gonna be elected federally, I came from a very modest working class background. We didn't elect people in my family, and it's been an incredible honor, and especially representing this place. It's so beautiful and diverse and complex and proud. It's a proud place. We don't suffer fools gladly, representing the Northwest has always felt like just very rounding for me, and I feel humbled and appreciative. I'm sad that I lost for sure, but not really for myself per se. I worry about folks that look for representation, that don't often have a voice, and I tried to be that voice sometimes, and I hope those folks are going to be okay, but I'm mostly just reflecting on the honor it was to speak on behalf of others as best as I could when I could. So yeah, I'm feeling settled, I suppose, with that question.
We just about landed here in the election campaign, but the fog rolled in over the runway just as we were coming down, and no matter how hard our pilot tried, we were unable to land. And I promised I would be back very, very soon, so here we are.
Over 100 people crowded into the Legion in Prince Rupert to meet NDP leader Jack Layton on Saturday night.
The idea that raw logs in such growing numbers would be exported from our beautiful resource-rich parts of Canada without creating jobs here is something that has to change. And we are committed to that.
When I was the president of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, following right on after Joanne Monahan was the president, that's going to hopefully give me the sort of base of knowledge of what communities need, because I think that Ottawa spends too much time at developing its own solutions remote from the people.
Layton took 2 days out of his vacation to visit Prince Rupert. He'll be spending the next 10 days in the Queen Charlotte's, kayaking, fishing, and learning more about our area.
And hey, frankly, I want him to be tied in emotionally to this place. I want him to be connected to people so that when we're sitting in Ottawa with some tough decisions, we're always considering people of the Northwest.
We've been talking to so many people here who are so hopeful about the future of Northern BC. And I think it's time that, the hope extended north of hope. And that's what we're here to try and accomplish. And Nathan Cullen has been a breath of fresh air. He's so optimistic and hopeful and speaks so proudly of the community that I know that you're going to be hearing in the House of Commons more and more about the issues affecting the North.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.